But when we look at some moments in our lives in the 6 months, even though we're still young, today's our grand opening service. This is the birth of this church. And when we got the vision for this church, I spent about a year putting together a strategic plan. And spent a year about putting it together and re-editing it because I mailed it out to strategic leaders in the country. I emailed it to them by faith and I said, would you please read over my strategic plan and just give me your feedback. Give me your feedback on this church. And they did that. And for a year I worked on a plan, and this is our first day of life in terms of the church. I planned out this church for the next 20 years of our life.
So when Peter had first shared the vision for the church, I just knew that God was all over it. And so I was immediately excited and had this feeling like, oh my goodness, this is the church I've always wanted to be part of.
So the first days of Metro, I'll be honest, it was scrappy. Scrappy in the sense of, if you think about this, the underdog trying to make it, that's what Metro felt like. It was trying to do with what we have, with the people that we had, the resources. And, after every service, it just felt amazing.
We met at a Fort Lee Athletic Center Club, Fort Lee Athletic Club. It's like an old man's club, right? Stinks of like cigarette smoke and like drinks everywhere and everything like that. But we transformed it. And for the children's area, we had to hide all the drinks in the bar so that the kids' first words were not Budweiser. And so I remember we went to IKEA and we got shower curtains, decorative shower curtains, and we put the curtains all over the drinks to cover the bar and the big Budweiser sign. Michelle had created this wonderful Metro Kids felt banner thing that we got to put over it. And it was so fun doing church like that because we're not gonna let anything get in our way of us having church. We're gonna make with whatever we have here, because we didn't have any money back then, right?
So in 2000, my wife and I moved out from New Jersey to Pasadena, California, and I did my seminary at Fuller Theological Seminary. And I just knew I was going into ministry. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I never even thought about church planning, quite honestly, because I had no church experience. I mean, I worked in the marketplace before I went into church ministry. So I'm back at Fuller. It's really great to be back here. It's been over 20 years since I graduated from Fuller Theological Seminary, and it's kind of nostalgic to be here and just to kind of reminisce and just talk about kind of how the vision of Metro Community Church got started right here. This is where it was birthed. Well, coming back here and seeing this library, McAllister Library, brings back a lot of memories because for me, I was doing a paper for a family therapy class and I had to write the spiritual journeys of every one of my family members. And when I got to my sister Susan grew up with a learning disability. And in a Korean culture, if you grow up with a learning disability, you might as well be invisible. And I was writing about her spiritual journey, how she was one of the most spiritual people in our family as a kid. But then as she got older and her learning disabilities became a lot more evident, people can notice it, she just walked away from the church because the church didn't accept her. And as a result of that, I remember just writing in my paper, I was just so angry with the church. And it was at that moment where God said to me, he said, Peter, one of the reasons why your sister isn't going to church isn't just because of those people in that church that you were a part of, but it's actually because of you. And he started showing me how I did not want her to go to church because she brought me shame. She embarrassed me. And I remember just breaking down the library, realizing that I played a role in her not wanting to be a Christian anymore. And it just broke my heart. And so I came downstairs from the library and I was standing literally right here, got my phone, I called her, and just in tears, I just asked her to forgive me. And I said, please, Susan, forgive me. I'm so sorry for what I did. And my sister's got such a big heart. She goes, Peter, it's okay, don't worry about it. And I remember just kind of, after I hung up the phone with her, I just said, that's exactly what Metro has to be about. It has to be a church where somebody like my sister can come and she can find a home at Metro. She could lead a ministry with somebody else and she could be friends with folks who went to Yale or went to an Ivy League school. And I said, that's what the kingdom of God is about. I don't have a lot of memories growing up as a little child. Really, the only thing that I remember the most in my life is growing up with a father who was physically abusive. My father wasn't always physically abusive. He only got abusive to me and my sisters and my mother when he was drunk. And he would come home and he would be in a rage and he needed to take his anger out. And as a result of that, my sisters and I would often run into the room and hide under the bed. And my mother was willing to withstand his fury, and she would get literally beaten down. It wasn't enough for him. He would then go into our rooms and would, pull us out underneath the bed by our ankles, and then he would hit us. And I never believed that I could find any type of healing from that. I actually believed I needed to make sure that nobody knows about this part of my life growing up. And when I became a Christian, I certainly believed that nobody should ever find out about this in the church. Part of Metro's story is a story where I had to allow this to be a part of my journey. And I had to really explore that, not only share my history and share what I'd gone through in my past, but also to deal with the dysfunctions, the issues that grew out of that. I don't know that if I didn't pastor Metro, if I didn't start Metro, these unresolved issues of my past, I don't know if I would have found healing and growth from it. I might still be hiding and concealing it and trying to do church the way most people do church, the way most pastors do it, hiding my past, trying to put on a spiritual front and hide behind my spirituality. And so I'm just so grateful to God. This has been so personal for me. This hasn't just been, here it is, start this church. But my life has been transformed. I've been healed. I've learned and I've grown through just really embracing my weaknesses.
There are many challenges facing the church. And I think that's part of it, in that there are multiple levels of why we are encountering some of the challenges. I would identify one that I've noticed more particularly over the last 10 years, and that's a sense of what I would call exceptionalism and triumphalism. And many years ago, I wrote a book on lament and on the book of Lamentations. And one of the reasons I wrote that book was I felt within our cultural setting, especially in the US, there's this sense of, oh, we're American Christians, we can do anything and we can accomplish anything. Or we should be at the top of everything. We should be in power because we're always right and always good. And that we know that's just not true. We're all fallen and we all continue to fall short of the glory of God. And we've got our issues here in the United States. We've got our issues in the church in the United States. And by ignoring it, we are not actually helping the church. We're maybe doing more harm to the church.
And I think, too, that in most churches that we have attended, particularly people who are now partners at Metro, the picture is to show strength, to show even perfection. And that's not the reality.
And so my perceptions of the church were based on the things that I gleaned from middle school and high school and youth group. And even though Jesus was great, I thought that I wasn't good enough to approach the throne of God. I wasn't good enough for Jesus to want me around. And so I came to church every Sunday and I would cry so much because I still felt so burdened by all the mistakes I had made like in the past.
Our church was never going to be a place where we can come and find our commonality and our weaknesses if I wasn't going to share it on the pulpit on Sundays. Like, I knew I had to preach and I had to share my own struggles in my life. And just to let you know that the reason why I believe in this so hard to my core isn't necessarily to claim like a defeatist mentality. Like, I don't see us embracing our weaknesses so that we can feel like we're defeated, like we're nothing. No, that's not what it's about. It's really about believing in what it says in 2 Corinthians 12:9, when Jesus says to Paul, it's only in your weakness can my strength be perfected in you. And so that's what it's about. So I knew that wasn't going to happen unless I actually started preaching about my life.
I remember the first time Peter had shared and with absolute vulnerability. And I remember seeing how nervous he was. And I was like, what is he going to share that he's so nervous about, right? But after he had shared in his sermon that Sunday, I was just like, but something about it was so freeing, incredibly freeing that I've never experienced in church before. And the feeling that I got was, okay, yeah, this is what church is about.
I heard him preach, and his transparency just blew me out of the water. I don't think I've met a person or a pastor who was as transparent in his preaching as Peter is and was at that particular time. Kind of scared me, as a matter of fact.
So it's one thing to hear vulnerable preaching. It's totally another thing to actually participate in it and to preach vulnerably. Hearing it from Pastor Peter especially was refreshing, surprising. There were times where I was cringing for him and for his family. and I wondered, did his wife approve that story? But it also made Pastor Peter more accessible. And it also made him trustworthy.
Receiving vulnerable preaching is awesome. Giving vulnerable preaching sucks. Just throw me up on stage naked, right? What has been beautiful about doing it is that a lot of times there would be things I would realize on stage as I'm preaching. Wow, I didn't know that this had impacted me in such a way. And I would almost like process it on stage with the congregation. And there's almost this like mutual, not alone feeling, because, you know, I've had people come up to me and tell me like, I didn't think that anyone struggled with that the way you struggled with it and the way I struggle with it. And they would confess and we would pray, and it would be just an amazing time.
I'll say the culture of preachers in the pulpit that are being vulnerable, it compels the hearers to be equally vulnerable, to take a look at themselves and say, okay, if they can do it and they have all the reasons to want to, in essence, present a face or a facade that is squeaky clean and polished, if they're willing to do that, I have to be willing to do that. So the examples that the pastoral staff has set at Metro, I think has, at least for myself, has compelled the hearers, the listeners, the members, the partners to respond to that in ways where they themselves are allowing themselves to be challenged.
In Metro, you connect because you hear the personal stories of our pastors talking about, you know, their difficult relationships with their husbands or wives or mothers or fathers, or dealing with disease and money problem, all these different things, and that connects.
And I think people come to Metro partially because of that transparency and that authenticity and that vulnerability. I don't think they come just to hear Pastor Peter dig up dirt on himself and his family. But I think in his preaching and his sharing, he shares honestly about his journey, that he's not yet arrived, and he's on the transformational journey himself. And that gives comfort and consolation to all of us in the pews.
I never really thought this through well. It just kind of happened very naturally. But when you have a church where our commonality is like our weaknesses and our pain, that really sets you up to really minister to people, whether they're inside the church or outside the church, where they're also going through some hardships and struggles. And so our church is very passionate about justice, advocacy, and compassion for people that that Jesus would consider might be the least, people that would consider to be like the last people on this earth, and the lost.
Justice, advocacy, and compassion is just missing in the world, full stop. It's missing in the secular world, and unfortunately it's missing in the church world. I don't think churches feel a need towards Jack. I think that Metro Community Church operates completely differently. That if we're not disseminating, spreading, allowing, searching for, pushing towards justice, advocacy, and compassion, then we have to stop calling ourselves Christians.
Justice, advocacy, and compassion, and especially the way that the Jack ministries are done at Metro, show me that there are timeless, endless, real-world applications to Scripture.
Right? We've got brilliant people here at Metro. We've got people with so many gifts. And if we could get all the smart people together in a room to say, like, how do we eradicate poverty? How do we eradicate racial injustice? How do we deal with our criminal justice system? How do we deal with our failing schools? I think that's where God is leading us. And it's important, right? Because people need to eat today. But beyond that, to the long-term goal of making sure that people experience a bit of heaven here on earth.
So for me, I had grown up in church before, and all I was taught was, yeah, you should do these ministries to help the poor. Like, it's a good thing. Go on these missions trips to go help. But the thing I learned in the seminary was like, no, you don't do this out of a sense of noble obligation. Like, we are bringing Jesus to them, because that's arrogant in my opinion. But we do it because we're meeting Jesus. Jesus says, I'm there. So you come out of a sense of reverence and worship me from it. And I just thought, no one's ever taught me that before. And there's a theologian, St. Francis of Assisi, he says this, he says, when you stare into the eyes of humility, you will have this eerie awareness that Jesus is looking right back at you.
One of the main ways in which I've been a participant in our Jack ministries through Metro Life. Our Metro Life program is an after-school mentorship program that serves under-resourced high school students in the city of Englewood.
Research shows that the time when teenagers get into the most amount of trouble, it tends to be anywhere between 3:30 and 7:30 in the evening. So we wanted to provide opportunities, experience, activities, resources that would keep kids engaged and at the same time be worthwhile in terms of their own development.
We have made a change to work with them for 4 years, which means that we get deeply embedded in their lives. We get to know them really, really well, and we follow them throughout their high school journey. And we help them as they're dealing with crises, as they are making decisions about school, what life is going to look like after they graduate. And we've had tremendous success rate.
You know, in the beginning, compassion was like what we really focused on in the beginning days of our church. It was all compassion. Christians love compassion. But when I started to learn years later in our church that we didn't really do a good job talking about racial justice. And one of the reasons why was because when Trayvon Martin got shot, some of our Black staff and our Black elders would go to Black churches to lament and grieve with the Black congregation. I remember just saying to them, like, why are you doing that? And they're like, well, you know, we just don't think Metro, we love Metro, but we don't think it's the church that we can actually lament and grieve. And I remember just that really hitting me hard. And so then we started really talking more about that. We started talking about the social inequities and the injustices with our Black and brown brothers and sisters. And it really caused an uproar in our church. People didn't like it. They thought we were being too political. And it wasn't. It was really, it's a gospel-driven thing. And I tried to explain it as such.
And I watched people stand up and leave. They were fed up. They didn't think this was God's heart. They didn't think that this was something that churches should be involved in. And I remember thinking two things, because we were very worried at the time. Peter was very open about his worries. The first was, I wondered how many people were willing to sacrifice their comfort to stay at this church and to have this conversation. I really wondered that. And two, I was actually thinking like, oh, am I gonna have to work here for free? And I would have. I really would have. Because at the time, I was learning and I just saw the anguish on people like Mama Moore's face when we would talk about that news. And I loved her, you know, and if I loved her, I would rejoice with her, but I would also mourn with her, right?
And we had people start leaving. We had sort of an exodus of people just starting leaving the church. And it was just really difficult. I mean, we started hitting a financial crisis. It was really hard. And I guess the thing that I was struggling with is this. Do I stop doing this because we're going to go bankrupt as a church and we might lose everyone? Or do I, if I really believe in it, do I just keep going? And I chose the latter. And I said, I believe this to my core. This is what Jesus would be doing. And so we kept doing it, and it was hard, but again, it was an opportunity for God to just break our church, but then it grew to even a different place after that. And I just realized that as long as you stick to your convictions that God gives to you, it's pretty amazing. So we continue to do that. We have different outreach opportunities that we do in the community. We're being pretty highly recognized by our city in Englewood, where they have recognized us as being a church that really loves the community. And we're not just here just to have people come and be a part of our services and just use the town and its resources, but they realize that we're a church that really cares about the people, and we're actually caring about the people, and we're trying to pour out our resources.
There are certain institutions and people that if we lost them, the city would be on the wrong path. Metro Community is one of the front common denominators to everything good in the city. There are very few churches that get it. This is a place of partnership, of compassion, talking and walking the energy of justice and equity. So all I can say is, if this is what you've done in 20, I can't wait to be part of the next 20.
I love that we came this far. 20 years is a milestone. But now I'm praying for the next 20 years and what God's gonna do in Metro, through Metro, in Englewood in the next 20 years.
I'd say to Peter, thank you for following God's prompting to plant Metro. I think God has used you in a very powerful way to show that we can do church in a real and authentic way. Peter hasn't bribed me to say this, but this is the healthiest staff that I've ever worked on.
We come together knowing our commonality is our weakness. We come together knowing that we are all broken people, but it's a safe place where we can share our brokenness, our grief, our pain, our struggle. And that's what we want for our church. And so, I've been here almost like 9+ years now. And there are several people that have been on staff longer than I have. And I think that's so cool that we really want to see this through.
When I talk to other people who's been part of other staffs, or after they had to move on from Metro, they would always come back and tell us, man, there's no staff like Metro. And I really do believe it's because we really deeply love each other.
20 years. It's hard. It's hard to put into words. I'm just immensely grateful to God, to our staff, to our leaders, for believing in a church like this. When I first started Metro, hardly anyone could even believe a church like this could really start in this area. It was a very atypical church. And seeing where we are right now in 20 years, I'm just overwhelmed with joy, gratitude, and hope. And I think for me, I know for sure that even if I don't believe it can happen, as long as God's in it, anything is possible.